So my name's Simon Parry and I currently teach arts management and drama at the University of Manchester. Yeah, so I've worked in different capacities with Touring now for probably 7 or 8 years, and initially I worked with Touring as a project manager at the Wellcome Trust. So I was managing a series of projects that are around engaging young people with science through the arts, and so my first memory of meeting Touring was in the context of their work on creating the debate plays. So when they were in one of I think it was probably the second or third iterations of producing Cracked and The Gift, etc. So those plays. Yeah, so I was working at Wellcome, and Wellcome obviously has had quite a long relationship with Touring. I sort of inherited working with Touring from my colleague Peter Feingold there, and I sort of became the main point of contact at Wellcome for the company, and we sort of developed a relationship from then on, looking at potential funding routes for them, and also looking at how they developed their work, the sort of directions that they went in, and to an extent also how they develop relationships with scientists and with other stakeholders in their work. Yeah, so what I think has been really interesting about their work is that it's maintained a fairly consistent approach whilst also developing innovative dimensions of it each time, so moving it on to an extent. So the sort of core process, I think, has remained fairly stable insofar as that they have a pool of scientific advisors that are attached to a particular project, but some who have run through a number of different projects. That they work with those scientific advisors to develop a brief for writers, and then again working with a pool of writers, some of whom come and go, but some of whom are new each time. They pose them this brief as a challenge. There normally is a workshop day where the scientists present various ideas, stimulus for the writers, and then the writers come off and go away and come up with a variety of ideas. And I've seen that process happen a number of times in relation to different projects. I suppose probably the first project where I saw it all the way through was Mind the Gap. So some of the others I saw them when they'd already been through that process, but then subsequently I've seen them use a similar process again with Every Breath, and subsequently. Yeah, well, I've enjoyed different ones in different ways. Really recently, the last one I've seen was Breathing Country, and I think that was remarkable because of the potential dry nature of the topic. And actually, I've seen a lot of the plays with different audiences, and I think obviously the audience matters. The audience makes a big difference to the dynamic of that particular event, that particular performance of that particular show. So, and that Breathing Country I last saw with the group of undergraduate drama students, so not necessarily the normal audience for their plays, slightly older than the normal audience, and also with a sort of a group that probably had more of an interest in the theatrical process or the artistic, aesthetic dimensions of the piece, rather than necessarily the content or the issue. Having said that, what I thought was remarkable about it is that they actually, for the period of the debate, actually sort of in some ways abandoned their approach as sort of sophisticated drama students in terms of just being interested in the artistic aspects, and completely sold themselves to the debate. And I think that sort of shows, is another illustration of the power of it, that whilst the artistic aspects of it are very important, they're all driving a debate, driving an engagement with an important issue, but potentially, with the case of Breathing Country and electronic patient records, not necessarily one that people find easy to engage with. So that was the most recent, and I think that was interesting in a particular way. I was really interested in the process of Mind the Gap, which I thought that was unusual in some ways, in that perhaps the many of the plays present a dilemma and a fairly clearly delineated debate, whereas I think Mind the Gap is somewhat more opaque in the way that it presents it. It presents a situation which raises a whole range of ethical and social questions, but it's not necessarily in the form of a dilemma, a clear dilemma. And so I enjoyed seeing that with different audiences who interpreted it in different ways and got very different things out of it. So, on one level, it becomes a debate about the impact of traumatic events, how they might affect people's lives, but it can also raise questions around drug development, around cognition enhancement. I've also seen it stimulate debates about dementia and how we should develop treatments for dementia, and I found that very interesting artistically, that play as well, because it's sort of many of the other plays are in quite a realist mode. And there are aspects of Mind the Gap that sort of verge on the surreal, and I thought that perhaps that also enabled engagement with it by audiences that were quite different. I think what it does is, to start with, it creates narratives. It creates stories around complicated issues. That it brings them to life, and it embeds the issues in an everyday life situation, whether that be a very realistic one or one that requires a more imaginative engagement. But it embeds difficult problems in everyday situations. It also presents scenarios which are perhaps close to young people's lives, perhaps further away from them, but they're ones in which you can become immersed for that short period of time that you engage with it, that you can develop sort of empathetic relationships with characters who might be going through something that you would recognise the situation, or maybe you have to imagine quite hard to recognise the situation. But it's a world that is separate from yours, but where you can have a relationship with it for that hour or hour and a half long. Narratives, characters are I think, are really important to it. But I think also really important to it is the facilitation of and the context of the sorts of debates that happen after. And there's always that opportunity straight after the play to do that, but also in the resources that you provide and the resources you provide for teachers, you can see how that can also be extended outside the context of the play. I might cheat and do too, but it's a sort of combination of imagination and rigour, I think. I think it's imaginative rigour or rigorous imagination.